They called him the Grave-digger Duke, a man so cold, rumour had it he froze the champagne just by walking into a room. Sebastian Thorne wasn't looking for a wife, he was looking for a victim, or so everyone thought. On the night of the Ashworth Midsummer Ball, the entire aristocracy held its breath. They expected him to choose the diamond of the season. Instead, he walked past the beauties, the heiresses, and the power players, and stopped in front of the one woman, trying desperately to disappear into the wallpaper. He offered his hand. He pulled her close. And then he whispered 7 words that didn't just change her life. They threatened to burn the entire British peerage to the ground. This is the true story of how the invisible girl brought the wolf to his knees. You won't believe what he said. The chandeliers of Ashworth Manor didn't sparkle. They glared. To Clara Halloway, the 1,000 crystals hanging from the ceiling looked less like jewellery and more like jagged teeth waiting to drop. She stood where she always stood, behind the large potted palm in the northeast corner of the ballroom, clutching a glass of lemonade that had gone warm 20 minutes ago. At 23, Clara was officially a spinster in the eyes of the London ton. She wasn't ugly. She had eyes the colour of wet slate and hair like polished mahogany. But she lacked the 2 things that made a woman matter in 1884, a fortune and a loud personality. "Stand up straight, Clara. You look like a wilting cabbage," a sharp voice hissed. Clara stiffened, her spine snapping straight by reflex. Her mother, Lady Margaret Halloway, didn't look at her. Margaret was too busy scanning the room like a general surveying a battlefield, her fan fluttering with aggressive speed. "I am standing straight, Mother," Clara murmured. "Well, try to look less beige," Margaret snapped. "Your sister Beatrice has already danced 3 times. Lord Harrington looked at her twice. Twice, Clara. If Beatrice secures Harrington, we might actually be able to afford coal this winter. Do not ruin this for her by looking like a sullen ghost." Clara took a sip of the warm lemonade to hide her grimace. The Halloway name was ancient, but their coffers were empty. Her father, the late Baron Halloway, had gambled away the family fortune on bad shipping investments and worse horses. Now, they were existing on credit and the fading memory of prestige. Beatrice, young, blonde, and terrifyingly ambitious, was their last chip to play at the table. Clara was just the debt they couldn't pay off. "I heard," a voice drifted from the group of debutantes to their left, "that he is coming tonight." The air in the ballroom seemed to drop 10 degrees. The gossip, usually a dull roar, sharpened into a frantic whisper. "The Duke?" another girl squeaked. "Here. But he hates London. He hates people," the first voice corrected. "Sebastian Thorne, the Duke of Blackwood. My father says he has a heart made of granite. He threw a footman out of a 2nd-story window for spilling tea. I heard he killed his first fiancée," a third whispered, delighted by the horror. "She vanished on the moors, didn't she? And now he sits in that fortress of his, counting his money and waiting for the next poor soul to torment." Clara rolled her eyes. Sebastian Thorne, the Duke of Blackwood. The man was less a person and more a boogeyman used to frighten debutantes into behaving. He was impossibly wealthy, owning half the railways in northern England, and notoriously reclusive. "If he is here," Lady Margaret muttered, her eyes gleaming with a predatory light, "then Beatrice must dance with him." Clara almost choked. "Mother, the man is rumoured to be a brute, and he's 35. Beatrice is 18. "He is a duke, Clara," Margaret hissed, gripping Clara's arm hard enough to bruise. "He could have horns and a tail, and I would still expect your sister to curtsy. If he is here, it is because he needs an heir. And if he needs an heir, he needs a wife. The orchestra struck up a waltz, but the energy in the room had shifted. It was brittle, anxious. At the top of the grand staircase, the major domo struck his staff against the floor. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "His Grace!" the announcer bellowed, his voice trembling slightly. "Sebastian Thorne, Duke of Blackwood." Silence swept the room. It didn't ripple. It crashed. He stood at the top of the stairs. He was taller than every other man in the room, with shoulders that strained the fabric of his stark black tailcoat. He didn't wear the colourful sashes or medals that the peacocks of London favoured. He wore black, unrelieved, but for the stark white of his cravat. His face was harsh, composed of sharp angles, and a jawline that looked like it could cut glass. But it was the scar that drew the eye, a thin, jagged white line running from his temple, narrowly missing his left eye and vanishing into his hairline. It didn't make him ugly. It made him dangerous. He descended the stairs slowly. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked through them. "God in heaven!" Lady Margaret breathed. "He looks like he's arriving at a funeral." "His own or ours?" Clara muttered. As the Duke reached the bottom step, the crowd parted like the Red Sea. No one wanted to be too close. He radiated a palpable wave of hostility. He wasn't here to socialize. He was here on a hunt. Clara watched him, fascinated despite herself. She saw something the others didn't. His left hand, gloved in white kidskin, was clenching and unclenching at his side. "He's nervous," she realized with a jolt. "The monster of Blackwood is terrified of crowds." Suddenly, his head snapped up. His eyes, dark and piercing, swept the room. They bypassed the preening beauties in the center. They skipped over the wealthy heiresses, fanning themselves by the windows. His gaze locked onto the corner, onto the potted palm, onto Clara. She froze. "No," she thought. "He's looking at the exit behind me." But he wasn't. He began to walk, a direct line, a predator stalking prey. The crowd gasped and shuffled out of his way, leaving a wide, empty path between the Duke and the Wallflower. "Mother," Clara whispered, backing up until her spine hit the wall. "Mother, we should go." "Stay right there," Margaret hissed, though her voice shook. She shoved Beatrice forward. "Beatrice, smile! Puff out your chest!" Beatrice, to her credit, stepped into the path, flashing a blinding, practiced smile. "Your Grace," she purred, dropping into a deep curtsy. "Welcome to—" The Duke didn't even slow down. He stepped around Beatrice as if she were a piece of furniture. He didn't look at her. He didn't acknowledge her existence. He stopped 3 feet in front of Clara. Up close, he was overwhelming. He smelled of rain, sandalwood, and cold iron. His eyes were not black, as they seemed from a distance, but a deep, startling indigo. And they were furious. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She looked down at his boots, unable to meet that intense glare. "Look at me," he said. His voice was a low baritone, rough, like gravel sliding down a hill. Clara forced her chin up. She refused to cower, even if her knees were shaking. "Your Grace." The entire ballroom was watching. Lady Margaret looked like she was having a stroke. Beatrice looked ready to murder. "You are wearing grey," the Duke said. It sounded like an accusation. "It is economical, Your Grace." "And it hides the dirt," Clara replied, her tongue moving before her brain could stop it. A flicker of something, amusement, surprise, passed through his eyes. "You are hiding. I am observing. You are bored. I am patient." Sebastian Thorne stared at her for a long, agonizing second. Then he extended his hand. It was a demand, not a request. "Dance with me." It wasn't a question. "I don't have a dance card, Your Grace," she stammered, "and I am sure my sister Beatrice would be." "I did not ask your sister. I asked you." He took a step closer, invading her personal space. The heat radiating from him was shocking. "Do not make me beg, Miss Halloway. It does not suit me." Clara looked at his hand. If she took it, she would be the envy of the room for 5 minutes, and the target of their scorn for the rest of her life. If she refused, she insulted the most powerful man in England. She placed her hand in his. The moment their skin touched, a shock of static electricity snapped between them. Clara gasped. Sebastian didn't flinch, but his fingers closed around hers with a grip that was possessive, almost desperate. He led her to the center of the floor. The orchestra, sensing the shift in the universe, began a slow, haunting waltz. Clara had danced perhaps 10 times in her life. She was serviceable but not graceful, but Sebastian moved with a surprising, predatory fluidity. He pulled her close, scandalously close. Her chest brushed the buttons of his coat. She could see the individual lashes framing those indigo eyes. They spun. The world blurred into a smear of color, leaving only him in focus. "They are staring," Clara whispered, her face burning. "They are waiting for you to realize you've made a mistake." "Let them stare," Sebastian rumbled. "Sheep always stare at the wolf." "Is that what you are? A wolf?" "I am whatever keeps them away from me." He spun her sharply, his hand firm on her waist. "You are trembling." "You are terrifying," she retorted. "Good. Fear keeps people honest." He looked down at her, his expression unreadable. "Tell me, Miss Halloway, what is the price of your family's debt?" Clara stumbled. He caught her effortlessly. "Excuse me?" "Your father was a fool who bet on slow horses. Your mother is a shark circling for blood. You are the bait." "How much?" Anger, hot and sudden, flared in Clara's chest. It burned away the fear. She stopped dancing, forcing him to halt in the middle of the floor. "How dare you?" she hissed. "You may be a duke, but you have no right to inspect my life like I am cattle at an auction." "I have every right," he said calmly, "because I am buying. I am not for sale. Everyone is for sale, Clara." He used her first name. It sounded like a caress and a curse all at once. "I require a wife, not a partner, not a lover. I require a shield. A woman with a good name, no expectations of romance, and enough intelligence to run my household without weeping every time I leave the room. You are pragmatic. You are ignored by society, which means you are observant. And you are poor, which means you are desperate." Clara felt like he had slapped her. It was cruel because it was true. "Why me?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "Why not Beatrice? She is beautiful. She wants this." "Your sister is a vapid child who would try to change me," Sebastian said, his eyes darkening. "I do not want to be changed. I want to be left alone. I want a wife who will take my name, spend my money, and leave me in peace at Blackwood Manor." He pulled her back into the rhythm of the waltz, leaning down so his lips brushed the shell of her ear. The room went silent, straining to hear. This was the moment that would shatter her anonymity forever. "Marry me," he whispered, his voice a low vibration against her skin. "Marry me, and I will pay every debt your father left. I will settle a dowry on your sister, so she can marry whoever she pleases. I will give you a life of ungodly luxury." Clara's breath hitched. It was the answer to every prayer she had ever whispered into the dark. Safety, security, freedom from her mother's tyranny. And in return, she whispered back. Sebastian's grip tightened on her waist. His next words were the ones that truly shook her. the whisper that froze her blood. "In return," he breathed, "you must promise that you will never, ever ask me about the west wing of Blackwood Manor. And you must never try to love me. Because if you do, I will destroy you." The music swelled to a crescendo. Sebastian pulled back, looking at her with those haunted, indigo eyes. He wasn't asking for a wife. He was asking for an accomplice to his solitude. Clara looked at her mother, watching with greedy eyes. She looked at the sneering faces of the ton who had ignored her for years. Then she looked at the scarred man offering her the world in exchange for her heart. "I accept," Clara said softly. Sebastian nodded, once. A business transaction concluded. He stopped the dance, turned to the stunned room, and spoke in a voice that carried to the rafters. "Lord Archibald," he called out to Clara's uncle, the current head of the family, "prepare the papers. Miss Halloway and I are to be wed within the fortnight." He didn't wait for applause. He didn't wait for congratulations. He bowed sharply to Clara, turned on his heel, and marched out of the ballroom, leaving a hurricane of scandal in his wake. Clara stood alone in the center of the floor, the eyes of London boring into her. She had just sold her soul to the devil of Blackwood. She just hoped she could survive the honeymoon. The carriage ride to Blackwood Manor took 3 days. 3 days of silence. They had been married in a small, cold ceremony in London. Sebastian had worn the same black coat. He had said his vows with the emotion of a man reading a grocery list. When told to kiss the bride, he had pressed his lips to her forehead for exactly 1 second. Now, as the carriage rattled over the cobblestones of northern England, the landscape changed. The lush green of the south gave way to the rugged, wind-swept moors of Yorkshire. The sky turned a bruised purple. "We are close," Sebastian said. It was the first thing he had said in 4 hours. Clara adjusted her gloves. "Is it true what they say? About the isolation? It is miles from the nearest village. The servants are loyal to me, not to gossip. You will find it quiet." "I like quiet," Clara lied. "Do you?" He looked at her, his gaze analyzing her again. "We shall see." The carriage crested a hill, and there it was. Blackwood Manor. It was a monstrosity of Gothic stone, rising from the moors like a dark, jagged tooth. Gargoyles leered from the eaves. Ivy strangled the west side of the house, the forbidden wing, choking the windows until they were blind. As they pulled up to the entrance, a line of servants waited. But they didn't look like the polished staff of London. They looked weary, guarded. The carriage door opened. Sebastian stepped out and offered his hand. "Welcome home, Your Grace," he said. The title sounded foreign on his tongue. Clara stepped out. The wind whipped her hair across her face. She looked up at the massive house. In the highest window of the west wing, the wing he had forbidden her to enter, she saw a flicker of movement, a curtain shifting, a pale shape. "Sebastian," she said, pointing. "Who is up there?" Sebastian froze. His hand clamped onto her wrist, hard enough to hurt. "No one," he snapped. "The West Wing is empty. It has been empty for 10 years. Do not imagine ghosts, Clara. It is a childish habit." He dragged her toward the front doors, but Clara knew what she had seen. She had seen a face, a woman's face, twisted in a silent scream. The heavy oak doors slammed shut behind them, sealing Clara inside. "Mrs. Danvers will show you to your room," Sebastian said, releasing her. "Dinner is at 8. Do not be late." "Where are you going?" Clara asked. "To work," he said, turning his back on her. "I bought you comfort, Clara. I did not buy you my time." He walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the library. Clara stood in the cavernous foyer, shivering. She had made a deal with a monster. But as she looked up at the grand staircase, she realized the monster wasn't the man who had just walked away. The monster was whatever was living in the West Wing, and it was watching her. The first week at Blackwood Manor was a study in suffocation. The house was magnificent, certainly. It was filled with priceless tapestries, mahogany furniture imported from the Indies, and silver that gleamed under the gaslights. But it was a tomb. The servants moved like shadows, speaking in hushed tones, their eyes always darting toward the staircase or the ceiling, as if waiting for a ceiling beam to crack. Clara's world had shrunk to the East Wing. Her bedroom was a palatial chamber of blue velvet and cold draughts. Every morning she woke alone. Every afternoon she wandered the manicured gardens where the roses were a blood-red crimson that seemed almost violent against the grey Yorkshire sky. And every night she dined with a stranger. Sebastian kept his word. He did not visit her bed. He barely visited her conversation. At dinner, he sat at the opposite end of a table, long enough to seat 30 men. He read correspondence while he ate, his brow furrowed, the scar on his face pulling tight in the flickering candlelight. On the 7th night, the silence broke. A storm was battering the moors, rain lashing against the high windows like handfuls of gravel. Clara watched Sebastian wince as a clap of thunder shook the house. He dropped his fork, his hand going instinctively to his temple, rubbing the jagged white scar. "Does it hurt?" Clara asked. Her voice sounded loud in the cavernous room. Sebastian froze. He lowered his hand slowly, his eyes snapping to hers. "The damp," he said shortly. "It affects the nerve endings." "How did it happen?" "Clara." A warning. "You bought my silence regarding the West Wing, Sebastian," she said, surprised by her own boldness. "You did not buy my silence regarding you. I am your wife. People stare at that scar. They whisper that you got it in a duel, or that a jealous lover took a knife to you. I should like to know the truth so I can defend you." Sebastian laughed, a harsh, dry sound devoid of humor. "Defend me? You think I need protection from gossip?" "I think everyone needs protection from lies." He stared at her, the indigo eyes softening by a fraction. He took a long sip of wine. It was not a duel, and it was not a lover. It was a fire. Clara's breath hitched. A fire. 10 years ago, the night the old stables burned down. I was foolish. I thought I could save the horses. He swirled the wine in his glass, staring into the red depths. I saved 2. I lost 3. And a burning beam collapsed on me. I was lucky to keep my eye. I was luckier to keep my life, though there are days I question the value of that luck. "And your fiancé?" Clara asked gently. "Was that when she died?" The glass shattered. Sebastian's hand had clenched so tight the crystal stems snapped. Wine, red as blood, spilled over his white glove and onto the pristine tablecloth. The servants in the shadows flinched. The butler, Mr. Henderson, took a step forward, but Sebastian held up a hand. "Leave us!" the Duke barked. "But your grace, the glass! Get out!" The roar echoed off the stone walls. The servants scrambled, the heavy doors thudding shut behind them, leaving Clara alone with the beast. Sebastian stood up, breathing heavily. He looked at his bleeding hand, then at Clara. He looked dangerous, unhinged. "You push too hard, little Wallflower," he growled, walking toward her. "You think because I gave you a ring and a title you are safe? You think you can pry open my rib cage and look at the rot inside?" Clara stood her ground, though her heart was hammering. She grabbed a napkin, dipped it in her water glass, and reached out. "Give me your hand, Sebastian. Do not touch me. You are bleeding. Give me your hand." He stared at her, baffled by her defiance. Slowly, hesitantly, he extended his hand. Clara gently picked the shards of crystal out of his palm and wiped away the wine and blood. The cut was shallow, but the tension in his muscles was coiled like a spring. "I do not fear the rot, Sebastian," she whispered, wrapping the napkin around his hand. "I grew up watching my father gamble away our lives while smiling at the neighbors. I know that monsters often look like gentlemen. You look like a monster, but you act like a man in pain." Sebastian looked down at her, his expression crumbling. For a second, just 1 second, he leaned into her touch. He looked as if he wanted to bury his face in her neck and weep. Then, a sound tore through the house. It came from above, from the west wing. It was a scream, high, thin, and terrified. "Sebastian!" Clara jumped back, gasping. "Who is that? That's a woman!" The vulnerability vanished from Sebastian's face instantly, replaced by a mask of cold granite. He ripped his hand away from hers. "Go to your room, Clara," he ordered, his voice icy. "Lock the door. Do not come out until morning." "Sebastian, someone is screaming. We have to help." "I said go!" He turned and sprinted out of the dining hall, taking the stairs 2 at a time, heading toward the forbidden wing. Clara stood trembling in the candlelight. She knew she should obey. The contract was clear. Never ask about the West Wing. But she wasn't just a wallflower anymore. She was the Duchess of Blackwood, and she was done being afraid. She waited 5 minutes, kicked off her heavy shoes and followed him. The hallway to the West Wing was cold, the air smelling of dust and decay. The carpet ended, replaced by bare floorboards that creaked. Clara moved like a ghost, hugging the shadows. She reached the heavy oak door that separated the wings. It was slightly ajar. Sebastian had been in such a rush he hadn't latched it. She slipped through. The corridor beyond was draped in white sheets, covering old furniture. It looked like a graveyard of memories. At the far end, light spilled from under a door. Clara crept closer, her breath held tight in her chest. She heard voices. "Please, stop!" Sebastian was pleading. His voice sounded broken. "You have to eat. Please! You poisoned it!" A woman's voice shrieked. It was ragged, hysterical. "You want to kill me like you killed the others! You devil! You murderer! I am trying to keep you alive!" Sebastian shouted back, the frustration raw. "Why won't you let me help you?" There was the sound of shattering porcelain, then sobbing, low, guttural sobbing that sounded more animal than human. Clara pressed her eye to the keyhole. She saw a room that looked more like a prison cell than a bedroom. The windows were barred. In the center of the room, Sebastian was on his knees, cleaning up a smashed bowl of porridge. And in the corner, huddled in a rocking chair, was a woman. Her hair was wild, grey and matted, hanging down to her waist. She wore a tattered silk nightgown that might have once been expensive. Her face was turned away, but her hands clawed at the arms of the chair. "I want to go home," the woman whimpered. "Where is my husband? Where is Sebastian?" Sebastian stopped moving. He looked up at the woman, agony etched into every line of his face. "I am here," he whispered. "I am Sebastian." "Liar!" the woman screamed, turning to face him. Clara gasped, clapping a hand over her mouth to stifle the sound. The woman's face was ravaged by burns. Half of her beauty was melted wax, a horrific map of scars that mirrored the single line on Sebastian's face. But it wasn't the scars that shocked Clara. It was the recognition. She had seen a portrait in the hallway downstairs, a portrait of Sebastian's mother, the Dowager Duchess, who had died 15 years ago. But this woman wasn't his mother. She looked younger, older. It was impossible to tell through the damage. "Get out!" the woman screeched, throwing a book at him. "Send for the Duke! Send for my Sebastian!" Sebastian stood up, defeated. He walked to the door. Clara scrambled back, hiding behind a covered grandfather clock, just as Sebastian exited the room. He locked the door from the outside, leaned his forehead against the wood, and let out a shuddering breath. He looked like a man carrying the weight of the world. He didn't see Clara. He walked past her hiding spot, back toward the inhabited part of the house. Clara waited until his footsteps faded. She stared at the locked door. Who is she? Clara wondered, her heart racing. She calls for Sebastian but doesn't recognize him. She is burned, just like he is. Is it his first wife, Camilla? Did she survive the fire, driven mad by pain? If so, Sebastian wasn't a murderer. He was a jailer, and Clara was living in a house with a ghost who was very much alive. The morning after the incident, the atmosphere in Blackwood Manor was brittle enough to snap. Sebastian was gone before sunrise, riding out to the tenant farms. Clara was left alone with her questions. She tried to interrogate Mrs. Sterling, the housekeeper, over breakfast. "Who lives in the West Wing, Mrs. Sterling?" Clara asked, buttering her toast with forced casualness. The housekeeper dropped a silver spoon. It clattered loudly. "No one, Your Grace. It is used for storage." I heard voices. I heard a woman. Mrs. Sterling's face went grey. "The wind, Your Grace. The moors play tricks on the mind. The draughts in the old chimney flutes sound like wailing. It has frightened many maids away." It didn't sound like wind. It sounded like suffering. "If you will excuse me, Your Grace," Mrs. Sterling said, backing away. "I must attend to the linens." Clara watched her go. They were all lying. By noon, the isolation was broken. A carriage arrived, bearing the Blackwood crest, but accompanied by 3 others. Sebastian returned from his ride, his horse covered in foam, just as the guests began to disembark. He looked horrified. "What is this?" he demanded of the footman. "I invited no one." A man stepped out of the first carriage. He was handsome in a sleek, serpentine way, dressed in the height of London fashion. Lord Julian Vance. He was Sebastian's cousin, and, if the rumours were true, the man who would inherit the dukedom if Sebastian died without an heir. "Cousin," Julian called out, spreading his arms. "Don't look so sour. We were in the county for the races and thought we'd descend upon you. We heard you'd taken a bride. We had to see the lucky girl." Behind him, a woman descended. She was stunning, blonde, statuesque, and wearing a riding habit that cost more than Clara's entire life. Lady Isabella Vane, the woman everyone had expected Sebastian to marry years ago. "Sebastian," Isabella purred, walking up to him and placing a gloved hand on his chest. "You naughty man, running off and eloping with a nobody. You broke my heart." Sebastian stiffened, stepping back. "Julian, Isabella, this is not a good time." "Nonsense!" Julian clapped him on the shoulder. "We're staying for a few days. You can't turn family away. It's practically unlawful." Clara walked out onto the front steps. She felt small in her simple grey wool dress compared to Isabella's emerald silk. "And this must be her," Isabella said, her eyes scanning Clara from head to toe, finding her lacking. "The new Duchess. How quaint." "Clara," Sebastian said, moving to her side. His body language was protective, almost guarding her. "This is my cousin, Lord Vance, and Lady Isabella." "Welcome to Blackwood," Clara said, forcing a smile. "We shall see if we are welcome," Julian smirked. "The house still feels heavy, doesn't it, Sebastian? Does the ghost of Camilla still walk the halls?" "Enough," Sebastian warned, his voice low and dangerous. The next 2 days were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Isabella and Julian were not there for a visit. They were there to investigate. They sensed weakness. They knew about the hasty marriage, the debts paid to Clara's father. They treated Clara not as the Duchess, but as a hired servant who had gotten above her station. At dinner on the second night, the sabotage began in earnest. Isabella had insisted on a formal dinner. Clara had spent hours trying to arrange the menu with a nervous Mrs. Sterling. When the soup was served, Isabella took one sip and spat it back into her spoon. "Good heavens," she cried. "It's rancid. Sebastian, surely you don't eat this swill?" Clara flushed. "I tasted it myself this afternoon. It was fine." "Perhaps your palate is used to simpler fare," Isabella said with a sugary smile. "Peasant food has a certain charm, I suppose. But really, Sebastian, one expects a certain standard at Blackwood." Sebastian said nothing, but he pushed his bowl away. Later, in the drawing room, Julian cornered Clara while Sebastian was pouring drinks. "He hasn't told you, has he?" Julian whispered, swirling his brandy. "Told me what? About why he really married you. He didn't pick you for your beauty, my dear, and certainly not for your wit." Julian leaned in close, smelling of expensive tobacco and malice. "He picked you because you have no family to miss you when you have an accident." Clara felt a chill run down her spine. "You are disgusting. I am honest. Camilla was beautiful, you know, full of life." And then she started asking what questions. She started going into rooms she shouldn't, and then, poof, a fire. How convenient. Sebastian tried to save her. Clara defended, though her voice wavered. "Did he? Or did he light the match?" Julian winked. "Watch your step, Duchess. The stairs in this house are treacherous." The climax of their cruelty came the next afternoon. Isabella suggested a tour of the gallery. She led Clara and the other guests to the portrait hall. They stopped in front of a covered painting. "Oh, this must be the new portrait of you, Clara," Isabella exclaimed. "Let's see it." Before Clara could stop her, Isabella yanked the velvet cover down. It wasn't a portrait of Clara. It was a painting of Clara, but defaced. Someone had taken red paint and slashed it across the throat of the figure in the painting. The word interloper was scrawled across the bottom in jagged letters. The guests gasped. "My God," Julian said, feigning shock. "Who would do such a thing?" Isabella turned to Sebastian, who had just entered the room. "Sebastian, your wife. She must be unstable. Look at this. Did she do this herself for attention?" "I didn't!" Clara cried, backing away. "I've never seen this painting before." "It's a cry for help," Isabella said sadly, touching Sebastian's arm. "The poor thing. The pressure of the title is too much for her. She's cracking, just like—" She trailed off, implying just like the last one. Clara looked at Sebastian. He was staring at the painting, his face pale. "Sebastian, I swear," Clara pleaded. "I didn't do this. They are trying to make me look mad." "Take it down," Sebastian said to the butler. His voice was flat. "Sebastian?" Isabella pressed. "Surely you can't let this slide. She needs a doctor, an asylum, perhaps, for her own safety." Sebastian turned slowly to look at Isabella. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. "You think my wife vandalized her own portrait?" he asked softly. "Who else?" Julian shrugged. "Unless you have a ghost." Sebastian walked over to the painting. He ran a finger over the red paint. "This paint is wet. Oils take days to dry. But this is not oil paint." He smelled his finger. "This is cosmetic rouge, mixed with water." He turned to Isabella. "The same shade of rouge you were applying in the parlor an hour ago, Isabella." Isabella's face went white. "How dare you! You accuse me!" "I accuse you of trying to torment a woman you are jealous of," Sebastian roared, his composure finally snapping. The sound was like a thunderclap. He stepped between Clara and the guests, a wall of black broadcloth and fury. "Clara is the Duchess of Blackwood," he announced, his voice shaking with rage. "She is the mistress of this house. If she says she did not do it, she did not do it. And if I find any of you disrespecting her again, I will not throw you out. I will throw you to the hounds." He turned to Clara, ignoring the stunned silence of the room. He took her hand, the first public display of affection he had ever shown her. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice dropping to that intimate, gravelly whisper. Clara looked up at him. He wasn't looking at her like a business partner. He was looking at her like she was the only thing in the room worth saving. "I am now," she breathed. "Get everyone out," Sebastian ordered the staff. "Dinner is cancelled. The guests are leaving in the morning." He led Clara out of the gallery, his hand tight around hers. But as they walked up the grand staircase, escaping the prying eyes, the victory was short-lived. A maid came running down the stairs, her face pale as a sheet. "Your Grace! Your Grace!" she screamed. "What is it?" Sebastian barked. "The West Wing," the maid cried. "The door! It's been smashed open, and she's gone." Sebastian stopped dead. He let go of Clara's hand. The colour drained from his face, leaving the scar standing out in stark relief. "Gone?" he whispered. "The window is open, Your Grace. There are footprints in the mud outside." Sebastian didn't wait. He bolted up the stairs, leaving Clara alone again. But this time, Clara didn't stay behind. She ran after him. Because if the woman from the West Wing was loose, and if she was as dangerous as Sebastian feared, then no one in Blackwood Manor was safe tonight. And Clara had a terrible feeling that the interloper scrawled on the painting wasn't a prank by Isabella. It was a warning from the thing that had just escaped. The storm that had been threatening all day finally broke. It was a deluge, a torrential curtain of freezing rain that turned the world outside Blackwood Manor into a blurring grey nightmare. Sebastian was already out the door, a lantern in one hand and a hunting rifle in the other. He didn't look like a duke anymore. He looked like a man possessed. "Stay inside, Clara," he roared over the wind as he strode into the dark. "Lock the doors and trust no one." Clara stood in the foyer, the wind howling through the open door before the servants managed to heave it shut. Her heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She's gone. The woman from the West Wing is gone. "Your Grace," Mrs. Sterling whimpered, wringing her hands. "What do we do?" "Where would she go?" Clara demanded, grabbing the housekeeper's arm. "Think, Mrs. Sterling. If she escaped, where would she run?" "The old chapel," Mrs. Sterling whispered, her eyes wide with terror. She always loved the old chapel. Before the accident. She used to play there as a girl. As a girl? The phrasing stuck in Clara's mind. "I'm going," Clara said, grabbing a heavy oilskin cloak from the rack. "You mustn't. My husband is out there hunting a ghost in the dark. I will not sit here and wait for them both to die." Clara pushed past the servants and ran out into the night. The cold was shocking, a physical blow that stole the breath from her lungs. The rain soaked her instantly, plastering the grey wool dress to her skin. She couldn't see more than 5 feet in front of her, but she knew where the old chapel was, a ruin on the edge of the cliffs, overlooking the churning sea. She stumbled through the mud, the wind tearing at her cloak. Twice she fell, scraping her hands on the jagged rocks, but adrenaline kept her moving. Ahead, through the driving rain, she saw a flicker of light. A lantern. "Sebastian!" she screamed. The wind snatched her voice away. She pushed forward, reaching the crumbling stone arch of the chapel ruins. The roof was gone, leaving the interior open to the stormy sky. Lightning flashed, illuminating the scene in a strobe of stark white terror. A figure stood near the edge of the cliff, where the stone floor broke away into a sheer drop to the ocean below. It was the woman. Her grey hair whipped around her scarred face like a Medusa's mane. She was laughing, a high, manic sound that pierced the thunder. And standing 10 feet away, his rifle lowered, was Sebastian. "Eleanor!" Sebastian shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "Step away from the edge, please!" "Eleanor." Clara froze in the shadow of the archway. Not Camilla. Not his wife. His sister. "Why should I, Sebastian?" The woman screamed back. "You locked me away. You told them I was dead." "I did it to save you." Sebastian took a slow step forward. "You set the fire, Eleanor. You killed 3 men. If the law found you, they would have hanged you. I gave up everything to keep you safe. I became the monster so you wouldn't have to be." Clara clapped her hand over her mouth. The truth hit her with the force of a physical blow. The rumors, the solitude, the grave-digger Duke. Sebastian hadn't killed his fiancée. He hadn't killed anyone. His sister, Lady Eleanor, had suffered a break from reality 10 years ago. She had started the fire that burned down the stables and scarred Sebastian's face. Sebastian had let the world believe he was the villain. He had faked her death, hidden her in the West Wing, and endured a decade of hatred and isolation just to protect his mentally ill sister from the hangman's noose. He wasn't a monster. He was a martyr. "Liar!" Eleanor shrieked. She took a step backward, gravel skittering over the cliff edge. "You just want the title. You and Julian." "Julian?" Sebastian froze. "What does Julian have to do with this?" From the shadows behind the altar, a slow, sarcastic clapping emerged. Clara gasped as Lord Julian Vance stepped into the light, holding a small pistol. He looked impeccably dry, having been sheltering in the ruins. "Bravo, Sebastian," Julian sneered. "A touching family reunion. I must say, I was surprised she lasted this long. I unlocked the door an hour ago, hoping she'd find her way to your bedroom and finish the job she started 10 years ago. But alas, she ran for the cliffs. Poetic, really." "You let her out," Sebastian snarled, raising his rifle. Ah, Julian tutted, aiming his pistol at Eleanor. "Drop the rifle, cousin, or I shoot her, and then I shoot you. And then I tell the magistrate that the mad Lady Eleanor returned from the grave, killed her brother, and then threw herself into the sea. I inherit the dukedom, the fortune, and the estate, a tragic end to the Thorn line." Sebastian hesitated. His eyes darted between his unstable sister and the gun pointed at her. Slowly, he lowered the rifle to the wet stone. "Let her go, Julian," Sebastian said, his voice low. "Take the money. Take the estate. Just let her live." "She's a rabid dog, Sebastian," Julian laughed. "And you're a broken man who married a pauper to keep his secrets. Speaking of the pauper..." Julian turned slightly, his eyes scanning the darkness. "I saw someone follow you, Sebastian. Come out, Duchess. Join the party." Clara's heart stopped. He had seen her. "I said, come out!" Julian fired a shot into the air. Clara stepped out from the archway, her hands raised. She was trembling, but her mind was racing. She looked at Sebastian. His eyes widened in horror. "Clara, run!" he shouted. "So dutiful," Julian mocked. "Now here is how this ends. Eleanor jumps. You try to save her and fall. And the Duchess, well, she witnesses the tragedy and perishes of grief. Or a bullet. I haven't decided." "You won't get away with it," Clara said, her voice surprisingly steady. "The servants know I came here. The servants are terrified of their own shadows. They'll believe whatever I tell them." Julian cocked the pistol, aiming it at Sebastian's chest. "Goodbye, cousin." "No!" The scream didn't come from Clara, it came from Eleanor. In a moment of lucid clarity, the mad woman looked at her brother, the brother who had sacrificed his life for hers. She looked at the man threatening him, and she launched herself, not at the cliff, at Julian. "Eleanor, no!" Sebastian screamed. Eleanor collided with Julian just as the gun went off. The shot went wild, chipping the stone archway. Julian shouted in surprise as the woman clawed at his face, driving him backward toward the precipice. "Get off me, you hag!" Julian shrieked, striking her with the pistol butt. But Eleanor held on. She looked at Sebastian one last time, and in the lightning flash, Clara saw a smile on her scarred face. A smile of peace. "I love you, Seb," she whispered, and then she threw her weight backward. Julian grabbed at the air, his eyes bulging. "No! No!" They went over the edge together. There was a long, terrifying scream that was swallowed by the crashing waves below. Then, silence. "Eleanor!" Sebastian roared, sprinting to the edge. He collapsed on his knees, staring down into the churning black water. Clara ran to him, grabbing his shoulders to keep him from following them. He was shaking violently, a sound of pure, animal anguish tearing from his throat. "She's gone," he sobbed, the rain mixing with the tears on his face. "I failed her. I failed her." "No," Clara said fierce and loud, pulling his head against her chest, rocking him in the mud and the rain. "You didn't fail her, Sebastian. You loved her. You loved her enough to burn for her. And she loved you enough to save you." They knelt there in the ruins, the Duke and the Wallflower, clinging to each other as the storm raged on, washing away the secrets of Blackwood Manor. The inquest was a sensation that gripped all of England. The bodies of Lord Julian Vance and a woman initially unidentified were washed up on the jagged coast 3 days later. The scandal was immense. But the story that Sebastian Thorne told the magistrate, and the story Clara corroborated, was a masterwork of half-truths protecting a sacred memory. They claimed that Julian had discovered a squatter in the ruins, a mad woman, and in an attempt to remove her, a tragic accident had occurred. Sebastian did not reveal that the woman was his sister. He allowed Eleanor to be buried in the family crypt under the name Jane Doe, finally at rest, finally free. He would not let the world dissect her madness in death as they would have in life. Life at Blackwood Manor changed slowly, but undeniably. The dark curtains were pulled back. The ivy strangling the west wing was cut down. The servants, freed from the oppressive weight of the secret, began to smile again. 6 weeks after the tragedy, the Ashworth Midsummer Ball came around again. Sebastian stood in the library, adjusting his cufflink. He looked different. The scar was still there, stark and white, but the haunted shadow in his eyes was gone. He wore a midnight blue coat instead of his funereal black. Clara walked in. She was breathtaking. She wore a gown of shimmering silver silk that hugged her figure, with diamonds, real Blackwood diamonds, around her throat. She no longer looked like a wallflower. She looked like a queen. "Are you ready?" Sebastian asked, turning to her. "Are you?" Clara replied, walking over to straighten his cravat. "They will stare. They will whisper." "Let them," Sebastian said, echoing the words he had said the night they met. But this time there was no bitterness. "I have nothing to hide anymore. And I have you." He took her hand, bringing it to his lips. "Clara, that night, at the ball, when I whispered to you." Clara looked up at him. "I remember. You said if I tried to love you, you would destroy me." Sebastian shook his head, his thumb tracing her knuckles. "I was wrong. I thought I was poison. I thought anyone who got close to me would end up like Eleanor, burned and broken. I was trying to warn you away from the fire. I know, Clara whispered. But you didn't stay away, he said, his voice dropping to that gravelly register that made her knees weak. You walked into the fire. You walked into the storm. You saved me, Clara. You are the only person in my life who saw the scar and didn't look away. He pulled her close, his other hand coming up to cup her cheek. I release you from that promise, he whispered, his forehead resting against hers. You may ask me anything. And, if you still wish to try, you may love me. Because I have loved you since the moment you looked me in the eye and told me you were observing, not hiding. Clara smiled, tears pricking her eyes. I broke that promise a long time ago, Sebastian. I loved you before I knew the truth. I loved the wolf even when I thought he was a monster. Sebastian kissed her then. It wasn't the cold peck of their wedding day. It was a kiss of fire and devotion, a kiss that promised a lifetime of making up for lost years. The carriage arrived at the Ashworth ball an hour later, when the announcer struck his staff and bellowed, "The Duke and Duchess of Blackwood!" The room went silent. Just like before, the crowd parted. Just like before, they stared. But this time, Sebastian didn't walk with his head down. He walked with his head high, his wife on his arm. He looked at the terrifying Lady Margaret Halloway, who was gaping at her daughter's transformation, and gave her a cool, dismissive nod. He led Clara to the center of the floor. "They are still staring," Clara whispered, smiling. "Let them see," Sebastian replied, his voice ringing clear and proud. "Let them see that the Wallflower tamed the beast." The music began. They danced, and for the first time in the history of the Blackwood line, the Duke was smiling. He leaned down, one last whisper for her ear alone. "I love you, Clara." And that whisper, unlike the first, didn't shake the ballroom. It healed it. And that is the true, untold story of Sebastian and Clara Thorne. History remembers him as the grave-digger Duke. But now you know the truth. He wasn't a villain. He was a brother protecting a tragic secret. And Clara wasn't just a lucky girl who won the lottery. She was the warrior who fought for his soul when the rest of the world had given up on him. It goes to show that sometimes the quietest people in the room, the wallflowers hiding behind the palms, are the ones with the loudest courage. I hope you enjoyed this journey into the secrets of Blackwood Manor. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more historical romances like this. Would you have walked into the West Wing if you were Clara, or would you have kept the promise? I read every comment. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story. I'll see you in the next video. Until then, keep observing.